From Southern California, this is The Circle of Insight, a show about everything in psychology. Hear the latest in news and views on psychology. Our motto is simple: wherever there is psychology involved, we are there. And now, here's your host of The Circle of Insight, Carlos Vasquez.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you again for joining us in part 3 of this very, very fascinating topic about ISIL, Middle East, and now we're going to cover Iran. We've had a long history with Iran from the days of the Shah to the days of Mossadegh to Al-Amini Khomeini, and now we're going to find out if we can actually reach a deal with Iran. The government seems to be getting closer and closer. We have a special guest today, Bob Doherty. Bob Doherty is the Executive Vice President of Avoidant Global Incorporated, a Los Angeles-based intelligence, security, and investigations company that provides intelligence-based risk mitigation consulting services, overseas travel awareness, and urban survival training to the private sector, and customized counterterrorism and intelligence training to law enforcement and military personnel. But Bob also served for 26 years as an undercover CIA operations officer and has deep on-the-ground knowledge and extensive experience in the Middle East, Europe, South America, and the U.S., working against most major foreign terrorist groups. Well, thank you again for joining us, Bob, in this last part.
You're welcome. Glad to be back on, Carlos.
This is going to be a very interesting story. We've had a long history with Iran, some good, some bad. So, I guess the first question I have is, can we really reach a deal with Iran, or is this all just media?
I think this is all smoke and mirrors. Look, let me frame this for you. Basically, since 1979, since the Islamic Revolution in Iran, when radical Shia extremists, as represented by the mullahs, overthrew the Shah of Iran, we have not had a good relationship with Iran. And in fact, they have viewed us as their number one strategic enemy. That continues today. We need to view everything with Iran in that lens. They want to become a regional superpower in the Middle East and Persian Gulf area. They want to become an equal partner at the table of nations with the U.S. and the West. They really want to export their revolution to other countries where there are majority or minority Shia populations. And if you look at the countries around Iran, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, in all of those countries, Carlos, Iranian government operatives in the form of their Ministry of Intelligence and Security, the MOIS, or more likely the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which is akin to the Iranian Special Forces or Green Berets. They're active in all of those countries I named covertly. And what are they doing in those countries? They are supporting with weapons, with funding, with training, with intelligence, Shia opposition groups who in most of those countries are trying to overthrow the legitimate governments of those countries. So what you see if you look at the map is the arc of a revolutionary power, okay? And let's make no bones about this. They are not going to stop, okay? These guys that have power in Iran, the theocracy, the religious leaders, they never had power before 1979. All of a sudden, they were thrust into power. They gained a country. They made it an Islamic country, and they're not going to give up that power. And as a manifestation of that power, what's the best thing you can do in the modern world to be the biggest dog on the porch? You can have nuclear weapons. And so for us to think that Iran's going to concede or negotiate or stop their nuclear weapons program is pure foolhardiness. The Iranian and Persian, going back, Iranians are Persians. They're different than Arabs. It's a completely different culture, completely different history, completely different linguistic background, different behaviors, different attitudes, different psychology. So we need to make that distinction between Arabs and Iranians. Most Iranians are Shias. Again, as I said in the previous segment, the minority sect in Islam. They've been oppressed historically by the Sunni majority. So you've got a lot of things going on in that Iranian psyche and that Iranian mindset and how they view the world. They view that they've been taken advantage of by the West continuously. the installation or the removal of Mossadegh in a coup carried out by the CIA was a Western power intervening in internal affairs of Iran. The pressure on Iran to stop their nuclear program. The fact that the U.S. invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, two countries that sit right next to Iran, made them feel insecure. So they're not going to give up their nuclear weapons program. They're not going to deal with us. The only reason they sit at a negotiating table with the U.S. or the West is to buy time. And the reason they want to buy time is so that they can become economically self-sufficient, they can rebuild their oil infrastructure and industry, and they can develop enough indigenous capability to produce their own advanced weapon systems, including a nuclear weapon. Because their calculation, which by the way is quite correct, is that if we have a nuclear weapon, all of a sudden we have a status of a superpower, like India does, like Pakistan does, like North Korea does. And then nobody can push us around anymore. So to me, Iran as it is now and their hardcore conservative element represent the greatest strategic threat to the U.S. in comparison to Al-Qaeda or Hezbollah or even ISIS. Again, we've been battling them for the last 30 years. There have been several hot wars in the Persian Gulf where the U.S. military has engaged with the Iranian military in a shooting war. If you go back to the early tanker war days in the 80s, they were mining the Persian Gulf. There was naval battles between the U.S. Navy and the Iranian Navy. They continue to threaten U.S. Navy ships. Again, the IRGC Quds force officers, their undercover special forces officers, are directly assisting Carlos for the past 5 years and continuing to help kill American soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan by supplying Iraqi insurgent groups with very advanced explosive form projectiles which can penetrate our armor. So wow. They are truly an enemy of the U.S. For us to consider negotiating with them, I think is a very bad strategic move on our part.
Let me ask you this question. Actually, one is a distinguishing question, and the other one is a hierarchy question. But the first one, you were mentioning they a lot, and I'm assuming they is the leadership, because I've heard a lot of people say that the people of Iran are pro-America, but the leadership are not. Is that fair to say?
That's absolutely fair to say. And again, we could spend hours on just the Iranian psyche and mindset alone, which is fascinating. Absolutely right. They have an interesting demographic. I think it's getting close to 50 or 60% of their entire population now is extremely young, has been born after the revolution. So have been born after 1979, have no memories of the revolution, don't have that infused in their core beliefs. That's a demographic that's going to argue against the regime. And yes, I am talking about the regime, the hardcore conservative cleric theocracy at the top that is ruling the country in the form of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and the IRGC, which basically functions as his Praetorian Guard, and he has direct command and control over. These are the conservative hardcore elements that want to hold on to that revolutionary power, while the vast majority of the Iranian population would like to embrace the West more, would like some more increased lifestyle choices, an increased standard of living, and actually likes America and Americans. However, we need to be really careful. That does not mean that the average Iranian who probably does not like his own regime would not be incredibly nationalistic if we, the U.S. or the West, decided to take military action against Iran, because they would be. So there's that dynamic going on. We can't afford to take moves that are going to anger the majority of the Iranian population, because they're very proud of their culture and their country, rightly so. They have a 3,000 plus year history. We need to take specific targeted actions against the regime who is not supplying a standard of living adequate for their people, who is carrying out terrorist actions overseas, and who, quite frankly, is a corrupt regime. You saw how in the last presidential elections in Iran, they actually put down their own people. So the IRGC and the Besiege, which is really a militia formed from the IRGC, were shooting their own people in the streets. Okay, that's not a democratically elected government. That shows you the desperate measures the regime will go to hold on to power. They're not going to give up that power. We need to try to pressure the regime, that inner circle of people who holds onto the power, while at the same time empowering the vast majority of the Iranian people. And again, that's a hard task to do.
Well, you wiped out question number 2, which was the hierarchy. That was beautiful.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
So I was going to ask you, who is the main leader, but it looks like you were saying the Ayatollah seems to be the head honcho, IRG working for him. And is Rouhani in this at all?
Rouhani's in this, but look, the president has always been a puppet of the supreme leader. The Iranians came up with this interesting concept. It's called Velayat-e Faqih. And Velayat-e Faqih means, it's a theological concept that, hey, the uppermost, the most educated, the most respected religious leader in the country should wield all the political power as well. Now, this concept is rejected by every other single Muslim on the planet, Sunnis and Shias alike. It is specifically only held in Iran, okay? And it's a clever little trick, if you think about it, for the Iranian clerics who gained power in 1979 to all of a sudden say, oh no, we shouldn't only be the religious leaders of the country, like most Islamic clerics are in their countries. We need to be the political masters as well. So let's reach down and interpret our form of Islam and say this Velayat-e Faqih, we are the supreme political authority as well. So really, the president of Iran and all the chiefs of the military forces and the commander of the IRGC and the Majlis, which is the Iranian parliament, they all answer to the supreme leader. What he says goes if there's any dispute or discussion. And if he has a certain vision or direction for the country, that's what's going to prevail.
Wow. That's really fascinating. Never heard that before. Never heard that before.
And again, you know, so when we know, for example, that the botched attempt to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in Washington, D.C., that was ordered at the very highest levels of the Iranian government, did that come all the way from the supreme leader? Maybe. Maybe he was aware of that. But that's significant because that's basically almost an act of war against this country. And again, I keep going back to the point, and I think people are surprised to hear it. Iranian Special Forces, the IRGC, have been for the past 5 or 6 years, since 2006, actively involved in helping kill American soldiers, principally in Iraq, but in Afghanistan as well, by supplying sophisticated, explosively formed projectile devices manufactured in Iran to Iraqi and Afghan insurgent groups that they then use to defeat our armor and kill our soldiers. So they're killing Americans right now, and they have been for several years, the Iranian government.
So they're
it is what it is. Absolutely.
They're making it a lot more difficult for our battle with ISIL right now, or are they making it easier?
In my personal opinion, I don't want to get into bed with somebody as my ally who's helped kill Americans in the past and is helping kill them right now. That's just a moral and ethical line I draw in the sand.
Let me ask you this question. We're going to move now into more in-depth conversation about the deal. How important is the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, in being able to monitor Iran? Are they as well just a puppet, or are they actually doing something productive when they monitor things like the PMD, possible military dimensions, or something like that, or the level of uranium?
Yeah, they're a very effective organization. They have been for a long time. You know, pretty independent, a lot of technical expertise. It all depends on the host country, right? If Iran's going to let these inspectors in to truly inspect all their nuclear facilities, then the organization will do a good job. But what has happened Carlos, and what will continue to happen is the Iranian government will restrict what the inspectors can truly see and will only show them facilities and technology that they say are devoted to peaceful nuclear research for the production of power. They will never give them access or tell them or show them the secret covert facilities that they have, many of which are underground, which are part of a parallel yet separate weapons program to take the highly enriched uranium and make it into a nuclear weapon. So the IAEA inspectors will never see that stuff, and thus what they report on is only a portion of what is truly visible. This is a game the Iranians have been playing effectively for years and years and years. We say at Avoidant that the Iranians are playing three-dimensional chess. If you remember your Star Trek, Spock used to play three-dimensional chess. The Iranians are playing three-dimensional chess with us, and we're still stuck playing dominoes. They're very much more advanced in their thinking, their strategic moves, thinking way beyond the first, second, or even third moves. And again, they've effectively played this game with us for years and years now, while their weapons program has gone on and continued to move forward with no effect from inspectors or anybody else.
What does it mean for Iran to have a nuclear weapon?
Again, as I stated previously, they want it for national pride, first of all.
Oh, not for them, but I mean for the world. What does it mean to us if they get one?
You know, I would say that Iran is very aggressive right now, currently, in exporting their revolution and trying to establish themselves as a regional, I'm talking about the Middle East, a regional power. I can only imagine if they had nuclear weapons capability, that aggressiveness would only increase in its scope in terms of trying to extend their sphere of influence deeper and farther throughout the Middle East and maybe even parts of North Africa. Do I think that they would use nuclear weapons against Israel or the U.S.? Absolutely not. Because you got to think about it, and this goes to the psychology of the leadership. These guys at the top, the supreme leader, the clerics around him, that conservative hardcore inner circle, are very smart guys. They gain power. They've kept power since 1979, and they want to continue to hold on power. They know in their deep, dark recesses of their mind that if we employ a nuclear weapon against Israel or the U.S., our existence is finished. And that's something we don't want. So I would tell you, they are not the true believers of an Al-Qaeda or an ISIS guy who's willing to sacrifice himself for the cause. The leadership is willing to sacrifice their ordinary citizens, but they're not willing to sacrifice themselves. So that, even if they get a nuclear weapon, do I think they would use it? Absolutely not. Do I think they would increase in their aggressiveness and hostility throughout the region? Absolutely yes.
Do you think they would use it against the other Sunnis? I mean, against
No.
the Sunnis? No?
Absolutely. I think their calculation would be if we use a nuclear weapon anywhere, the U.S. and Israel are going to attack us and finish us, as at least take out the leadership. So I just think it becomes the hidden hand, right? It's the mailed fist under the velvet glove. We got this. We can use it to threaten, to intimidate, without ever having to use it. Much like the U.S. has done since the end of World War II.
That's a good point. It's a very good point. So if Bob had his utopia, if he was dreaming about it, what would a deal look like with Iran if it could happen?
I don't think you can make any deal with them.
Nothing.
What has been effective, and I'm talking from the later stages of my career that I know to be true because I saw it firsthand, is the economic sanctions. When in the past 4 or 5 years, when we finally put some teeth into them and made them really hurt Iran, that has caused the government heartache. They haven't been able to get equipment to upgrade their oil infrastructure or keep it in repair, so their oil production has been falling. They can't process raw oil into gasoline. They actually import gasoline into Iran because they can't process it because their facilities are falling apart due to the economic embargo. Their standard of living for citizens has gone down. Pollution has increased in Tehran because their gas is so bad.
This is currently now.
Right. Prices for foodstuffs have gone up. So the economic sanctions are hurting. We need to keep that kind of pressure up, which basically shows that the Iranian government is unable to provide a standard of living for the majority of the Iranian people because of their hardline stance against the West. And then the hope is that the majority of the Iranian people eventually rise up and throw these guys out of office. I would say that kind of started in the 2009 presidential elections, and yet the regime's response was so brutal and repressive that it cowed everyone back to their homes. So I don't know if that can be duplicated again or not. But that would be no deal with Iran, keep up the economic sanctions, maybe even increase them, and really try to pressure and isolate the regime.
Because from a psychological perspective, you were mentioning their demographic is changing, 50, 60% now, young people. And we know a lot of times young people want to do the opposite of their parents,
right?
The opposite of the trends. So from my psychological brain, I'm looking at this in the next 10 or 15 years, we're going to get a lot more distance between now and 79. And these people are going to start saying, what are we doing here? Economic sanctions, this craziness, that could all lead to an overthrow.
I totally agree with you, Carlos. And the more we can do that, satellite TV is officially banned in Iran. But if you look at a Google image shot of Tehran, you will see a satellite TV dish on almost every single rooftop.
Really?
The internet is heavily censored. They can shut down outside media outlets and the internet when they want to, as they did during the protests. But the more we can pump in positive images of the West, economic development, the freedom that we have here, the market economy and the standard of living that brings, jobs and employment. I mean, there's stories of grown men and women in Iran hiring themselves out as prostitutes, proud people, just to make ends meet because they don't have enough money to buy food, something that is totally against their culture and their religion to be a prostitute, male and female, and young kids. I mean, this is the desperation that they're reaching there. So we need to keep pumping that in there. And you're right, as the demographic gets younger and that increases, there's going to be more of that restlessness. And the more images of the West we can give them, the more we can show them the positive advantages of not as a system like ours. It doesn't have to be our government or a capitalist-based market economy, but just not this system that you have now. You can have a better way of life and be better represented and not repressed by this elite conservative hardline circle at the top, the better that they might rise up, and maybe covertly we aid them with that, with money, with logistics, maybe even weapons in the future. I don't know. You're getting into covert action then, and the president has to authorize that, and that's a tricky, slippery slope. But you're right. What overthrew Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union was and Yugoslavia was the people wanting a better standard of living. And they themselves then rose up and threw out the leadership. We saw that with Egypt as well. Mm-hmm. So we got to do things that appeal to that psychology of the people, to the motivations of the mass of people in the country. And I don't think we're doing that to the best of our abilities right now.
I agree. Thank you. That was awesome, Bob. That was phenomenal. 20 minutes of really learning about Iran and getting under the psychology, really, of the Iranian situation. Not just the political angle, but also the psychological angle. If people want to get a hold of you and they want to learn more and get educated about this area, where do they contact you?
Yeah, please reach out to us on our website, www.adredenglobal.com, or you can reach me at my email, robert@adredenglobal.com. I'd be happy to help anybody out and answer any questions they might have.